Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be quite brief because a lot of what I was going to say has actually been covered by previous three speakers, in fact, which I think is accidentally fantastic. Although may have had a hand in writing some of the minister's speech, but other than that, it was fortuitous that a lot of the themes are consistent. If we can, I've lost my slide clicker. So I'm going to briefly just give you an overview of where we're at with the mental health plan, 10-year plan, and also the accommodation and support strategy, which flows from the plan. If I can get this to work. There we go. So the plan was released in 2015 after a long consultation period. Action 24 of the plan is probably one of the most important. And when we did the consultation process for the 10-year plan, that was quite an extensive statewide process with broad involvement of consumers, carers, families, and so on. Wherever we went, wherever we sought feedback, the very first thing that came up in those forums, with almost the identical wording, was we need safe and stable accommodation. We need safe and stable homes. And that was emphasised time and time again as a fundamental precursor to any form of recovery from mental health or AOD issues. So as a result, in the final version of the plan, actions, I think it's 97 through to 102, are all about safe and stable housing and support to remain safe and stable in that housing. So homelessness has already been articulated as being of critical importance, whether it be from a Royal Perth perspective, from a human rights perspective. In fact, the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission report states that, and I quote, "One of the biggest obstacles in the lives of people with mental illness is the absence of adequate, affordable, secure accommodation. Living with a mental illness or recovering from it is difficult even in the best circumstances. Without a decent place to live, it is virtually impossible." Highlighting this and picking up on some of the stats from Royal Perth, a study done a few years back now, but not much has changed, showed that of all of those patients, consumers, in an inpatient setting in mental health acute setting, 43% could have been discharged immediately if they had somewhere safe and stable to be discharged to. So instead, we house them, if you like, in a hospital bed, which is now running Amanda at about $1,550 a day. So up from the $1,200. There's a shock, didn't go down. With outcomes for them in terms of quality of life, which are vastly inferior. As an example, real life example, because I watch the occupancy of mental health beds across the state on a daily basis. I usually get an email at around 10:30. We had an occupancy issue in a regional hospital. So it was running at 95 to 98% occupancy. The reason being for that was it had two patients in there who had been there for over a year because there was nowhere to house them outside the hospital. It's not the most therapeutic environment. It's okay for acute intervention, but for someone's recovery, that's not what you want. So, as I said, one of the priorities was to develop an accommodation and support strategy. So we've gone through, again, a very comprehensive consultation process. Everything we do in mental health and AOD, we do with our consumers, carers and families. So that's the process we're in at the moment. We have a draft strategy together. So that's just a summary of the various consultation mechanisms. And here's a list of the participating stakeholder organisations. Almost. There we go. So if you think we need to add any to that, please let us know. But we've tried to be as comprehensive as possible. And as you can see, it's a mixture of peak bodies, government departments, and community-based organisations. So the vision of the strategy is essentially for Western Australians with mental health and/or AOD issues to have timely access to a range of appropriate accommodation and support options to meet their personal and cultural needs. So the importance of support options is probably what's coming through as the differentiating factor in this strategy, I think. So the principles underlying the strategy, shortly summarised here. So individual rights, so a human rights framework that sits across all of it. Personalised, that accommodation and supports must align to the individual's particular needs. And if they're not aligned to individual needs, then the outcomes are not going to be successful. Inclusive communities, the whole point of housing someone in a stable and safe environment is to have them as part of the community, which again is fundamental to recovery from mental health and AOD issues. As has already been emphasised, effective system-wide partnerships are absolutely crucial because there's no one entity or service provider that can deliver on the needs for individuals. And of course, we need to seek ways to improve continuously over time. Key focus areas of the plan, so increase access to housing, establishment of strategic collaborative partnerships, provision of contemporary housing and support models. So often people's needs are not for a 4x2 on the urban fringe. It may be something different. We have to entertain the thought of numerous people living in single dwelling if that's what gives them the social connectedness that they need to actually thrive, to recover and thrive. So we need to be continually thinking about what models might be worth pursuing, talking with consumers, carers, about what might suit their individual needs constantly. And that's reflected in the existing suite of housing options that the Mental Health Commission currently provides and supports. We need to look at the unicorn to see if we can actually catch one. I'm talking there about social impact bonds. I've never seen one. I've heard them exist. I've heard them, they stroll in and create magic wherever they go. I think we actually need to run this to ground and actually figure out, is this going to work for us or is it too complicated? Is there something simpler we need to pursue? So let's lasso the unicorn finally. Reflecting the complexity and trying to summarise some of what's already been said, this is the accommodation and support sort of summary diagram, if you like, and it goes to some of Amanda's comments in particular. So the outer wheel of the diagram is looking at what are the referral pathways and entry points into accommodation to make sure that we're accommodating the various ways in which people firstly eventuate with a need and then have that need referred. The middle wheel is the different accommodation types. So again, reflecting the various needs and circumstances of individual and recognising the fact that people may move through different types of accommodation over time. And it's particularly relevant in a mental health and AOD context where people's recovery happens in various stages, their needs change over time, and they can change in a positive way in terms of they need less and less support, but at times that may be in a negative way. That is, their recovery or their illness or their AOD issues are such that they need a change in the nature of and intensity of their support. So we need to actually recognise that people move through the system back and forth and around, not linear in one direction, which is kind of what historically our systems, processes, supports have all been designed to accommodate. And thirdly, the inner wheel, the darker blue wheel, is about the different support mechanisms to assist individuals. And again, recognising that those supports will change over time. This is a list of the Mental Health Commission's various supported accommodation, if you like, offerings, acknowledging that there's not nearly enough of them, but what it shows is that we already have a variety of mechanisms in place to accommodate and support people in a safe and stable way. And just emphasising, if we haven't emphasised it enough, the importance of support to people in accommodation. So the bar on the far right is alcohol and other drug safe places, so predominantly sobering up centres, which shows that we're meeting about 80% of demand in that space, which is across the board. That's actually pretty good. We will be remodelling the 10-year plan between now and Christmas, and I suspect that figure will change a little bit in terms of what the need is, and we've certainly seen a shift in occupancy of that form of accommodation in the last 18 months. So we'll look closely at that, but what I want you to focus on in this chart is the bar on the left. So the dark green is the accommodation support services for people with mental health issues, and it shows where, in terms of meeting overall demand, we're meeting less than 20% of what people need. So that's a huge challenge. But it shows that if there's going to be a return on investment, every marginal dollar, even some existing dollars, has to go into that support if we're going to achieve outcomes for individuals. So that's really most of what I wanted to touch on. I think I'm probably pushing up against time frame. I've got, what does that mean? Sorry. Oh, that way, that's right. So the 10-year plan, this is just a summary of the actions. Many of you would be familiar, but it continues to be our kind of guideposts around development of the strategy. In terms of where the strategy goes to, it will be released for, after all that consultation is finished, which we're kind of wrapping up at the moment, it will then be released as a draft for public consultation. So there'll be a whole round of further input and consultation required. Many government departments are involved in the development of the plan as well, which is fantastic. So we're already looking at, well, we're already collaborating. And while the structures of government, and I probably shouldn't say too much given my previous job, while the structures of government can both help and hinder what we all do, it's our collective willingness and our hearts to it that actually makes a difference. So thank you very much.